Hello, good morning, and welcome to everybody to this RTS student masterclass, where we're delighted to have Nima Elbagir with us, a very distinguished journalist. Now, my name is David Harrison, and I'm the chief investigative reporter for Al Jazeera Investigations, and also a director and producer, and do pretty much everything else as well at times, or at least that's how it feels. But anyway, a warm welcome to you all. I have worked in probably about nearly 100 countries now, reporting everything: wars, World Cups, natural disasters, you name it, I've probably done it. And I focused in the last decade or so on undercover investigations, which is a very neat way to segue into what Nima does, because Nima is now the chief investigative correspondent for CNN. And Nema's done incredibly well since she came into journalism, and has picked up various awards, including quite recently an Emmy, which is a very impressive award, as you'll gather. Now, I'm going to pass you over to Nima, who will tell you a little bit more about herself, and then we can move on to what we're going to do next, which is to show you some clips from Nema's work. Nima will talk to them and say a few words after. I will then maybe ask a question or two, but the priority will be to give you time to ask questions of Nima, because I appreciate that you guys, not all of you want to be journalists. I understand that. But media is a very, very broad field. Television is a broad field. And one thing is absolutely sure, that the skills of journalism can be applied to many, many fields and many areas of television and media generally. So I'm sure you'll all get something from it. I certainly hope so. And now I'm going to pass you over to Nima, who's going to introduce herself very briefly.
Hello. Thank you for that, David. That was very kind of you. As David said, I'm CNN's chief international investigative correspondent. We were set up in, almost a year now, but we've been working on investigations for the last few years. And I am Sudanese by birth, more recently British. I want to say 5-6 years ago. And we focus from here in London. We're a smallish team. In fact, two of the team are in here somewhere, our photojournalist and our producer. We're a smallish team. And from here, I think that we have kind of fallen into work that hews very closely to international humanitarian law and the violations of international humanitarian law. So kind of very targeted on work that would meet the bar of evidence that you would want to see at a tribunal or in some kind of judicial process, which is a ludicrously high bar, even as I'm saying it. And it means that our work takes a hell of a lot of time and has to be incredibly meticulous. But so far, so good.
Okay, well, as I said, shortly we're going to be looking at 3 clips from Nema's work, which is from her recent work, some of it award-winning. I'm sure you'll find it interesting, and we're going to do Q&As after that. But perhaps before we do that, perhaps Nima can just give us a few words on how she got into journalism, because, as we all know, it's easy as pie.
Yes, especially if you are not white, female, immigrant, didn't have a British passport, wasn't able to work in this country for a while. So while my story is probably incredibly specific, I think there is a little bit of universality in it, in the sense that one thing that almost every single journalist, I think you'll probably agree, has in common is that you have to be absolutely and utterly relentless. So I had the privilege, the luck of being the 3rd generation of journalists in my family. My grandfather was a journalist, my father was a journalist, my younger sister is a journalist for Sky. It's okay, there's no competition between us. I forgive her. And I started working, I went to university here, I went back home to Sudan, I started working in Sudan. And that's kind of, I guess if there was one lesson that I always try and pass on to younger journalists who get in touch, it's that try and get out of where everyone else is. And I was very lucky, I was able to go home to Sudan. And Sudan at the time was not necessarily at the forefront of any kind of big international story. But it meant that I was one of the few people who spoke a good standard of English and was available to work with international organizations based from there. And that then allowed me to find my way back here. I think part of the problem often is, especially, and this I'm hoping is a generational issue, but especially if you're not the kind of person who, from the perspective of perhaps the older class of editors, is somebody that they will take a chance on and kind of send out the door automatically. Oh, you look like a brave young man, off you go. I think sometimes it's very good to have circumnavigated that a little bit and come into a newsroom, being able to say that you had whatever limited experience somewhere else. And so that's what I went and got. Worked with Royce's. I came back to the UK on their graduate trainee program. Then I started working with Channel 4 News had launched a small kind of subsidiary satellite channel, and that helped me find my way into broadcast. And then from there, I came to CNN, and I've been here for 12 years.
Yeah, well done. It's quite a story. And I think the lesson we can draw from that is that journalism, it isn't easy to get into, but if you keep knocking, you're persistent and you're determined, you can make it. And believe me, I know from my own experience, that's what it takes. You know, you can't just expect the doors to open and say, oh, yes, I want to be a journalist. I remember being interviewed for one job when I was leaving university. And this guy who's the editor of a big paper in Wales, he said to me, you know what, you're the first guy who's come in and sat down in this interview who, when I've asked him, why do you want to be a journalist, hasn't said to me, because I want to influence world opinion. That's not what journalism's about. You know, it's about getting out there. And I think, you know, Nima's absolutely spot on. You know, the one characteristic you really need to be a journalist is resilience. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep knocking. You get knocked down, you get back up, because it's tough. So, okay, I think now we're ready to move on to the first clip. And we'll take questions afterwards. The questions will be brief. We'll discuss that after the clip.
Next morning, we discovered the government had made an offer designed to bring the movement back into the fold. Things were tense at the camp.
Commander Hamdan is in a meeting with his senior field commanders. They might not look like much, sat cross-legged at the bottom of a dried riverbed, but what you're looking at back there is the senior command of the most potent fighting force in the Darfur conflict.
The commander told us the government was offering cash to help develop Arab villages and a share in power. And the leadership knew the government had been trying to persuade their commanders in the field to switch sides. Events began to move quickly.
We've been told by the commander's chief of staff that a deal between them and the government is not going to go ahead by the looks of things. People have been gathering at our camp all morning to feed us different snippets of information. It became very clear that these guys were thinking that clashes with the government is very likely.
The leaders called a meeting of their top men. At stake, whether the biggest fighting force in Darfur would rejoin the government or become its enemy.
All of the force commanders have been gathered here. There's a really consultative process in Arab tribes here. And even though Commander Hamdan might be the overall commander, he has to make sure that he's consulted his men and his men are on board before he can go forward with any decision he makes. The officer who's standing there now is putting forward the case for going back to war with the government. He's saying, I look around at you, the blossom of manhood, and I know that we are not here for fun. We are here because we have grievances, we have genuine grievances.
It was clear the men felt the government still needed to do more to regain their trust.
It's incredible to be at this gathering, to be at a gathering of people who have never been before seen by the world's media, but to be at one of their most important meetings.
Commander Hamdan now knew his men were solidly behind him.
He wants you to film this.
His message to the government, give me what I want or face the consequences.
The commander is saying this is the second time that they haven't delivered. And within the next 24 to 72 hours, we are going to make clear to the world what our position from them is. And he said we will fight them till Judgment Day.
So that I was actually
very well-deserved applause, may I say?
Well, yes, because I was supposed to be on my honeymoon. I was just watching that in a state of shock.
At least it was sunny, you know.
Yeah. Oh, you're going home to get married.
But perhaps then you could tell us, you know, I mean, not many women in that clip, I noticed.
No.
So tell us just give us a flavour of what it was like for you as a female journalist to be, how did you sort of get the story? And did you feel any fear at all? I mean, what were the dangers that you overcame?
So just to contextualize it, the men that you see there, that documentary was called Meet the Janjaweed. And the Janjaweed were the Arab tribe-led militias that participated in the genocide in Darfur. So there's a good chance that almost every man sitting there had perpetrated some kind of war crime. Rape was a big part of the conflict. And it was me and the producer-director, who's the cameraman, Andrew McCarthy. And bless him, I was literally the only woman in the camp. And so everything required that he accompany me. Anytime I attempted to undertake any kind of ablution, any bathing required, like just this rigging up of some kind of bush, chair, tent situation. I little kind of shell shocked because I don't remember looking that young, but in hindsight, I mean, I looked very young. I think you walk into those contexts and whatever difference you have, part of being a journalist is to incorporate that into your armor. So I knew going into there as a woman, and not just any woman, as a Sudanese woman, so someone that for them fell within a cultural context that made it very uncomfortable, that I was kind of out of my place, so to speak. The soft-spokenness, the fact that I didn't trigger any kind of machismo. I always say whenever we come up to, even if it's just at the checkpoint, right? Like that also comes down not only to trust in yourself and the knowledge that you never have to raise your voice. You have nothing to prove in these situations, right? But also trust in the rest of your team and having a zero tolerance policy for anyone who's out there to prove anything about themselves. Everything has to be about the story. If your sense of self and ego gets in the way, then not only is it dumb as hell, it's also dangerous. So in that context, I was there as an arbiter of the audience, and I had to kind of keep reminding myself of that, even as I was talking to these people, and having to still find ways to say to them, right, but we have heard. It's also about kind of equipping yourself. We heard in this village, this many miles away, and then you face them with the facts.
Okay, we're going to take a couple of questions. Let's keep them short, and then just because we are quite tight for time here. But let's have a couple of questions then. Who's got something to ask? Okay, at the back there.
Right in the back.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's a really good question. So we do so much research, and I think for two reasons. One, it's part of your armor, right? Like it's also about your headspace. It's what enables you to kind of walk up to someone like that, surrounded by his men, in that kind of showy camouflage turban, and be able to say, right, but that's not necessarily true, is it? Right? So making sure that you are across not only all of the arguments against that person, but also looking back and watching interviews or reading interviews that they've done to familiarize yourself with what their kind of line of defense may be. Because the last thing you want is for them to be able to throw something at you that you weren't expecting.
And they still may.
Yeah, they still may.
You have to be prepared to tap dance and deal with it, but Nema's absolutely right. The research is absolutely crucial.
Well, it's also, it's a confidence game, right? So the more that you walk in there knowing that you have read almost everything about this person, spoken to as many people as have met him as possible. What are the soft places in his psyche? What's the thing that's going to get him to take off his microphone and scream at me if I go a little too far? Has he done that before? And I think then that allows you to feel like you're coming in, perhaps able to predict quite a lot of what you're going to hear.
Anybody else? Yeah, in front row.
Hello.
Hello.
This has been a long time in the making. It's 2004. I'm walking on the beach in Somalia, Mogadishu. And as far as my 5-year-old eye can see, there are dead fish on the beach. 2020, in Bristol, I read a report by the University of Bristol saying Italy and her neighbours are dumping nuclear waste in the shores of third world countries. And with Putin and his energy and more European nations building nuclear waste, I'm worried where the waste, more and more nuclear power stations, I'm worried where the nuclear waste will go. And my question is, why aren't the public aware and why are there no reports about this?
Well, okay, thank you for your question. I mean, it doesn't touch it directly on Nema's film and Nema's work. Did you want to make a couple of remarks about it, or do you feel that's something that's
Well, no, but I'm
zone?
just wondering, is journalism something that you're interested in?
Yes.
So why don't you write about it? You know, I think we're in such a wonderful time where, I mean, I know Twitter, everyone complains about what a nightmare it is, but it is still a fantastic platform. There are so many platforms available. There are so many mediums available. And the bar to entry gets lower and lower every day. So if this is something that you're interested in, this is something that you should be researching and you should be talking about, and then figuring out a way to then get the world's attention. But we're no longer in a time where some editor sitting in ITN or the BBC or CNN gets to decide what you think is important.
I think that's right. And again, this speaks to a point Nema made earlier, that, you know, in the same way that she knew Sudan and got stuck into stories in Sudan, you know, there's something that motivates you, that moves you, that you're passionate about, you care about, then just get on with it. And, you know, the access to information we have now is greater than ever before.
But also, what's your value added? You know, so you have access to a story that I frankly hadn't even heard about. So that's your value added as you kind of come into a newsroom, or as you think about coming into this career. You always think, what is your unique perspective? What is authentic to you? And this is clearly something that you're incredibly passionate about and is authentic to you. So, hey, this could be your opportunity.
I mean, the fact that you've highlighted it shows that this is something you care about. Okay, all right. Okay, sorry, we're not going to have time for, unfortunately, it's really, really tight, so we're going to manage a couple of questions for each clip. But the second one, perhaps you just say a few words about the second clip, Nema, if you would, which is the Libyan slave trade. Just tell us very briefly how you got this and what it shows.
Ahead of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. Just cue it, just intro it.
This was a story that we had heard about, that people had been talking about. And actually had gone all the way up to the UN Security Council. The then chief prosecutor of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, raised it at the UN Security Council, and Libya mobilized allies on the UN Security Council like China and Russia to obstruct any further investigation. And I and Alex Platt, our photojournalist, yay, there he is, and producer Raja Razik were able to leverage actually work that Raja had been doing previously at the height of the refugee crisis into Europe with the Syrians. And this is a lesson to always, even if it doesn't fit into the story you're working on at the time, if something grabs you, just put it away somewhere. And so she was posing as a Syrian who was trying to get passage to Europe in the boats from Libya. And as she was walking around, she speaks Arabic, she's Palestinian American, the Libyan people smuggler was trying to get her to avoid a corner of the room where she could see that mainly it was Black Africans. And she said to him, well, what's going on there? And he said, oh, no, you don't have to worry about them. They're third class. They'll be at the bottom of the boat. They're not, you'll be first class. You know, the Arabs go on the deck. And she kind of filed that away. And after 9 months of research, we were actually able to find our own way into a slave auction.
And in a sentence, what are we going to see in this clip?
You are going to see what actually happens to these African migrants who are promised by the people smugglers that they will be given passage to Europe. Yes, eventually some of them did, but while they were held in Libya, many of them were sold as slaves by the very people smugglers.
Great. Okay, well, let's take a look at the next clip.
A man addressing an unseen crowd. Big strong boys for farm work, he says. 400. 700. 700. 800. The numbers roll in. These men are sold for 1,200 Libyan pounds, $400 apiece. You are watching an auction of human beings. Another man, claiming to be a buyer. Off camera, someone asks, what happened to the ones from Niger? Sold off, he's told. CNN was sent this footage by a contact. After months of working, we were able to verify the authenticity of what you see here. We decided to travel to Libya to try and see for ourselves. We're now in Tripoli and we're starting to get a little bit more of a sense of how this all works. Our contacts are telling us that there are 1 to 2 of these auctions every month and that there is one happening in the next few hours. So we're going to head out of town and see if we can get some sort of access to it. For the safety of our contacts, we have agreed not to divulge the location of this auction, but the town we're driving to isn't the only one. Night falls. We travel through nondescript suburban neighborhoods, pretending to look for a missing person. Eventually, we stop outside a house like any other. Adjust our secret cameras and wait. Finally, it's time to move. We're ushered into one of 2 auctions happening on this same night. Crouched at the back of the yard, a floodlight obscuring much of the scene. One by one, men are brought out as the bidding begins. 400, 500, 550, 600, 650, 700. Very quickly, it's over. We ask if we can speak to the men. The auctioneer, seen here, refuses. We ask again if we can speak to them, if we can help them. No, he says. The auction's over, we're told. And we're asked to leave.
Okay, so strong stuff there indeed. Now, you cued the film for us. We have an idea of how you got there. Tell us a little bit more about this difference between, you know, breaking news and developing longer-term investigations. How did you go about it?
So I think this was probably the first proper longer-term investigations that we did. It was helped by the fact that I actually was on maternity leave while I was researching that. I still have my little baby book and the kind of like little notes in the margin that I will not be sharing with
Remember,
my son.
keep a baby book, right?
until you know, maybe 16, I'll show him that. But I think what that did is it forced me to really take the space. Right, I think that normally, so what you saw at the beginning was the video that our contact sent us when he was able to get into the one of the auctions to prove that you could. And normally in a breaking news environment or in just a straight hard news environment, that would have been enough. We would have said CNN has verified, but given just the enormity of what we were saying was happening, it seemed almost immoral to not be able to be stronger than that, to be able to say, because, I mean, this was at the height of Donald Trump and CNN is fake news and journalism is fake news. And I think that's one of the most amazing things that investigative work, you know, like your own work does, is that it is the clearest rebuttal against that kind of disinformation, intentional disinformation. And so our argument to our bosses was, we believe that this isn't in some dangerous, deep dungeon. We believe that this is brazen, that it is accessible, that it is done in the open air. And if that is the case, then we can access it. And it was almost the biggest battle was almost inside our own heads, right? Alex, you'd say that, right? Just kind of convincing ourselves that, well, actually, we should push further. Actually, we should push further. And I think that was probably 6 years ago now. What that taught me, I think, was that you have to be the arbiter of what success looks like for you. You have to decide what you want to achieve with every individual story. And even if your editor or your colleagues or your peers say, that was wonderful, you have to ask yourself, was it really good enough?
Yeah. I think, and the key point there, of course, is, as with all investigations, at the heart of it is evidence.
Yeah.
Without evidence, you have nothing. It's not allegations, it's not claims, it's not reports, it's not someone banging off on Twitter or Facebook. It's hard evidence. And that's the toughest thing to get, particularly if the bar is set high, as both our organizations do. You know, the bar is set incredibly high. And it's got to be something that will defend you, and you'll be able to defend in a court of law. You know, and so this is why investigations require so much more. And it's very interesting to hear Nima talk about how they came about this film. We'll take a couple of questions on that, please. Yes, we'll take one in the front, and then we'll go to one at the back. All right.
What's the kind of process for getting approval on going undercover like that? Obviously, you need to show that you've got your research, you've got your evidence that you're going to be safe to an extent. But what does that entail, kind of pitching it?
Well, so we are very lucky because the UK is a fantastic, sometimes may not feel like it, but it's a fantastic jurisdiction for journalism law. So you have to prove that there's a public interest. Because if you're going undercover and you're going undercover on private property, then potentially you are trespassing. So you have to, and in America that can get you shot. So you have to be able to argue legally that there is a public interest. So obviously in this situation, there's a clear public interest. The second, this is obviously an incredibly extreme example. So from the perspective of our management, there was also a concern about, well, we can't protect you from anything that happens in that moment in a heavily armed part of the world like Libya, but what can we do to mitigate the risk of you being kidnapped, you being moved to a second location? So we were working with local Libyan security analysts and local security. So what can I control, I think, is always a really important one to think about. What can't I control, but is that a risk that I'm willing to take? And that, again, brings you back to public interest. If we had actually had to confront someone, if we were doorstepping someone, then you then have an even longer list of things that you have to be thinking about. Have I clearly told him who I am? So in that instance, we were able to argue that for security reasons, I obviously could not declare that I was a CNN journalist, but we still had to get approval from our legal teams for the cover story. Is the cover story enough to balance against the public interest argument and no more? You can't, go there and take on a completely, different identity and just run away with it in the moment, right? But did I declare myself publicly? Did I identify myself as a journalist? If I'm on private land, the first instance, someone can tell you go away. But once I continued to engage with them, did they then engage with me? Because if they engage with you after initially saying, I don't want to talk to you, okay, that's fine, but let me explain why I'm here. If they then still say, you have to leave, then unfortunately at that point, you will have to leave. But before you leave, if there is no opportunity to then reach this person to get a right to reply, as we call it, you still have to say, well, I would like to give you the opportunity to respond to allegation X, Y, and Z. And, and in that moment, the adrenaline is like coursing and it's incredibly emotional, and you almost have to kind of learn it like a script in your head before you go up. I have to hit this, this, and this. And then, of course, I still also have to ask. So in that instance, I was asking where the men had gone. Where were they being taken? And then I think the third thing, which comes after the legal and the ethical and the standards obligations, but I think is a very human obligation, is what do I need to find out if I'm going to try and figure out how to help these people after this is over, right? Like there's the journalist and then there's the human being. And so in that instance, we were trying to ask, do you know any family? Is there anyone that we could, the guy was looking at me very strangely, and I had said to him in Arabic that I was looking for someone. And so I said, the people who've just gone, is there someone I can call to link up to them? Obviously, the answer was no. But you have to at least feel comfortable that you've asked those questions.
Yeah, and another point, just to add to that, is I know that what we have to do, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys, is that before we're allowed to do an undercover operation, we have to produce prima facie evidence. And without that, you can't get the go-ahead, because you can't go around filming people secretly. That's illegal. But with prima facie evidence of wrongdoing, and you get the legal okay, you can. So when you get the green light, then you can do it. And I think, again, this idea of protecting your sources is absolutely crucial. And we've set up people in different countries to protect them because they've blown the whistle, or they've given us documents or stuff. So there's a huge duty of care that Nima quite rightly points out, duty of care to the people that we are writing about. So one more question. Anyway, did I say somebody? Yes, I did say you. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, you've kind of touched on it there a little bit, but obviously witnessing something like that, you must feel moved, feel an urge to kind of intervene and stop what's happening. Of course, you can't do that at risk of endangering yourself. But what, if anything, can you do after the event, or does your role kind of end at raising public awareness?
It's a really good question, and I think every single situation is different. So in that instance, there was a bit that we didn't film, which is afterwards we managed to, through our contacts, get the people that I was asking about brought via the safe house we were in. And they were so traumatized. We were trying to give them food or water. I was trying to speak to them. And I could tell they understood Arabic because the guy in the clip was speaking Arabic. But they, obviously completely traumatized, wouldn't engage. But we had to make the call that we weren't going to film them because we got what we needed from a public interest perspective. And there is also this issue of at what point does it become purely entertainment for entertainment's sake, right? And only you can answer that question. Where is the kind of line where I've gotten what I needed for the public interest aspects in the story? At what point do I have to kind of say, stop? I mean, Alex and Barbara and I, we were in Yemen and we were filming these incredibly malnourished children. And I think, we're very lucky because we've worked very closely together for years and we're very close friends. But there is that moment when you both kind of look at each other. And that's the cue. Even if one of you kind of forgets themselves, how do we ensure that we don't overstep? Because these are still human beings.
Exactly. Very good point. Thanks, Nima, for that. This is a subject we could talk about for hours. Unfortunately, we haven't got the time. We're going to crack on with the next clip. But I think, first of all, Nima, just a couple of sentences just to introduce what's coming up.
So this is the Predator Priest investigate. Actually, and this follows on very well from what we've just been discussing. So this is, again, an instance, but this time we weren't filming undercover. This is a priest who was a convicted paedophile in Belgium, who was then relocated by the Catholic Church, essentially moved out of harm's way to run the Catholic Church's charity organization in the Central African Republic. And we had just been up to the north of the country filming his victims. And then we had this opportunity, I say had this opportunity as if it just happened. We had worked for days to set up, to figure out where he was. Bizarrely, he didn't sleep in the diocese compound the night before, which is weird enough and creepy enough. So it took us a while to find him. And then we finally found him in the middle of a meeting in the Caritas compound. So it's church property, it's private property. But because he was a flight risk, because we knew that there were children on that compound, so we also had an ethical obligation to confront him. We had kind of game theoried out all these scenarios with our legal teams, and we got permission to confront him in the manner that you're going to see.
Great. Okay, well, let's take a look at the third clip.
Melo kuti gimini ngiti beti gimontallo ame piti da me peti kamena pa a ere lot ne loke abi amula to kote jigate ito sa kwa nzika geta se ban zazu mawa melo kilo gutuma kwa mingi tila ngona so akanjona pa.
That was clearly really tough for both Alba and his father. But we had to show them this picture. We had to know that the man that Alba says abused him is Father Luke Delft. What happened in there clearly came at such great cost for both of them, but it was something that they told us again and again they needed to do because justice is not easy to get up here.
We leave Kagabandura. It's time to track down Delft. This is Bangui, capital of the Central African Republic. We've traveled here from the north where we met Alban. Caritas Centrafrique's headquarters is here. Sunday, and we get an early morning wake-up call. Our contacts are telling us he regularly celebrates Mass in the area. We try the churches. He's nowhere to be found. We try him at his residence, but he hasn't spent the night. Nothing.
We've spent the whole morning looking for Father Delft. It's been a bit of a wild goose chase, but now we're hearing that he's back at his office, and we're heading there now. Hello, Father Delft.
Yes. No.
We spoke to the prosecutor in Belgium. We'd like to speak to you to ask you some questions about breaking the terms of your sentence. We also spoke to some children up in Kagabandura who had some really disturbing stories to share with us. And of course, we want to hear what you have to say about it, Father Delft.
Nothing.
What do you mean, nothing?
Nothing.
You're a priest, you're a man of God. These children are accusing you of abusing them, and you have nothing to say for yourself?
No.
Do you know Alban? Do you remember Alban? He said he was 13 when you abused him. Do you remember him? Alban? Alban, in Kagabandura. At the compound, the Catholic compound. He and his father spoke to us. He was crying. He said that you told him you loved him, and then you hurt him. You have nothing to say.
No.
It doesn't disturb you to hear that children said this about you?
No.
Do you want to say anything?
No.
Okay. Well, we will of course be speaking to the managers of Caritas about our findings. Thank you for whatever this was. He had nothing to say for himself. He was utterly blank. He didn't care. He did not care. He didn't remember. You could see it in his eyes that he didn't remember that little boy's name. The things that that little boy told us, the bravery that that little boy showed in speaking to us, and that man in there didn't remember him.
Okay, well done. Another powerful story. We've had a lot of cases of abuse in recent years, sadly, and they're all very, very harrowing. Just want to ask, Nima, really, how do you cope with that, with the emotion of dealing with a story like that? We could see you were clearly upset by it. How do you cope with that?
That clip that you saw, I think a lot of kind of more traditional journalists would consider it unorthodox in a lot of ways, right? Because you are, as the journalist, you're supposed to be titanium and you don't show emotion. But it actually, both Barbara and Alex felt that it gave the audience permission to feel what we were clearly all feeling. It allowed you to connect with what that moment felt like for us. And I just remember feeling enraged. I was so angry. I was so angry that actually there was a point where Alex had to have me kind of slightly pulled out of shot. Like we
could sense that.
Oh no, I was squaring up to him. I was properly in his face. And what was really horrible about that is we hadn't realized how big he was. I mean, I'm 6'1". And so he's probably, and Alex is about 6'4", 6'5", and he was towering above both of us. And I think having just come back from interviewing Alban, we were kind of in his head. And so when Luke Delft stood up and he just kept going up and up. Like in that moment, I kind of felt that smallness.
Not intimidated. Yeah.
And I think what you do with it is I think it was absolutely, as much as it still pains me to watch it, I think Barbara and Alex absolutely made the right call. What you do with it is you put it on camera, you put it on television, and you channel that emotion and that rage into allowing people to understand really the impact of gross crimes like that. And he actually is, this year, he's finally standing trial, because what we were able to prove with that, and as much as that looks like, oh, that's part of the storytelling. It is part of the storytelling. But as you said, part of the evidence has to underpin the storytelling. And what we were doing there is proving that he's not in Belgium. He's in violation of the terms of his original sentencing when he was convicted of crimes against children.
Yeah. No, I think there are cases where showing emotion can actually help convey the sort of power of the story, and I think that was a good example. Okay, we haven't got much time left, but we will squeeze in a couple of questions. So we take this one. Okay, yeah, no, fine. Yeah, fine. Go ahead. Yeah, in the hat.
From the clip, I can see you had so much rage and so much emotion. Did you at some point wanted to rip his face off?
Yes, yes. There was this awful moment where, because I was so in my head, and as I said, you've got like this litany of things that for legal and standards and ethical and storytelling that you have to kind of go through. And so I was thinking of that, and then he got quite close to me, and I remember thinking, because you go into that mode. I remember thinking, oh, I think he might hit me. All right, well, if he hits me, I'm going to fall in that direction. Let me not fall on Alex. And then I suddenly realized that I was so busy thinking about all of that I hadn't realized that I was slowly losing control. And it was only when, Alex and Barbara were able to masterfully cut around it with our editor, Mark Barron, but there were a lot of shots where it was like half my face, my nose, because I just leant into him. And I think it was a really good lesson, because no matter how professional, no matter how many years you've been doing this, the problem is that you can't ever lose touch with your own humanity, right? Like the danger can be that when you cut yourself off to be able to feel, from being able to feel so you can continue doing the work, then that makes you less effective as a journalist, right? Like you have to feel, you have to have empathy. But at what point does that empathy endanger your ability to do your job? And in that moment, I kind of had to right the ship a little bit. But yeah, I absolutely wanted to clobber him. I did. I really did.
I think we all did, actually.
Yeah,
we were sort of hoping you would. But clearly that wouldn't have been very professional.
No.
But, it's a very good point about this whole balance between compassion, empathy, and professionalism. In some ways, we almost have to be like compassionate doctors. You have to sort of take a step back, but not lose your empathy with your patient, as it were. Okay, so the last question, I think we're going to you, I think. Is it? Yeah.
I just wanted to know really about, I know you have to do like background research and stuff, but in terms of like character and personality, did you already know how, or do you like already look into how someone might react if a journalist has already been to see that man before or something? Do you have that in your mind when you go into situations like that?
That is part of the kind of more of the security aspect of the research, right? Like, is this person a risk to you physically, a risk to the team physically? Absolutely. But then I also think, this was a documentary that took months. So unfortunately for us, we ended up having a lot of discussions with people whose specialism this is. And so when you hear me talk about him not recognizing that boy and why it was something I really wanted to focus on, is because in the previous interview, so especially with a body of work like that, you will have spoken to so many people as part of finding your way into which narrative arc you want to focus on. And we had been in the States and we'd been speaking to experts who were targeting these kind of priests who were then being protected by the church. It was a specific order of the Catholic Church. And that was one of the things that really stuck in my head, that this priest said that in a way, abuse is incredibly impersonal for the abuser, because it's about them, they and their narcissism and their monstrosity center them. So often they don't remember their victims, right? Like they kind of disconnect from that, almost as a self-protection mechanism. And it was something that really had haunted me and stuck in my head. And that's also a really good thing to bear in mind. If it sticks in your head and it haunts you, then it is something you have to find a way to communicate to the audience. So I kind of thought about that. We discussed it. And so when we really thought out how we were going to stand, where we were going to approach. But again, then you just at some point have to kind of know that you've done all of that work and all of that research, but then you just have to trust yourself in the moment.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm afraid that is all we have time for. We could go on for hours and hours exploring all of this. But thank you to Nima.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.